Thank you so much, Alison. And I'm really pleased that you believe the Assange model can be replicated in this instance, which should give people a great deal of hope. It takes a lot of time and energy, of course, but there are 211 people watching, so that's a very good start. Our second speaker this evening is Brian Toohey. Brian started as a journalist with the Australian Financial Review in 1973 and has written for numerous other publications. He was editor of the National Times and the Eye. He's the author or co-author of 5 books, including Tumbling Dice, The Story of Modern Economic Policy, and Secret, The Making of Australia's Security State, which is a fabulous book. I recommend you all buy and read it if you haven't already. Brian will be covering the US economic hold on Australia. Thank you, Brian.
US economic policies are not in Australia's interest, nor those of the American people. There is now, however, a distinct chance that the US will go to war to destroy China's high-tech industries because it can't do it by the competition it once took a lot of pride in. And although the US and Australia recognise Taiwan as part of China, US planning envisage intervening if China occupies Taiwan. In this case, some scenarios involve an extension of the war to the heavy destruction of much of China's high-tech industries on the East Coast. Australia should put a huge effort into avoiding war rather than a military build-up, and so particularly ones under the fatuous guise of trying to deter a war. That does not work very often. Both sides of politics are now, in the US politics, I should say, are now championing banning or handicap competition from outside, especially from China. Currently, examples of damaging economic policies include the imposition of 100% tariffs on Chinese electric cars sold in America. These cars have the great advantage that they don't pump out carbon dioxide, unlike most of what is sold in the United States. The aim is to hurt the Chinese economy, but it also denies the American people access to low-priced electric cars. Australia's economic interests are best served by policies that don't stifle the Chinese economy and thus constrain Australian exports to our biggest trading partner. Of course, Australians themselves gain from imported and subsidised cars from China or anywhere else. Australia should tell America bluntly that we do not approve of their increased tariffs on EVs. China subsidises the production of electric cars, but so do others. The US heavily subsidises the production of local EVs. The American investor knew what he was doing, Warren Buffett, I should say, who now owns 20% of the Chinese car maker BYD, which looks like surviving the US and the European attempts to crush it with increased tariff barriers. The critical factor for BYD is the heavy emphasis it puts on R&D. It employs over 100,000 scientists and engineers. I've actually visited the place, not where the headquarters, not where you could see any of this happening. It has developed a battery using lithium iron phosphate, which will not catch fire, and it's significantly cheaper than other car batteries and goes further than most of its competitors. It is working on making much cheaper batteries, which will contain no lithium. Australia, of course, is a large lithium miner that exports this product to China. Those exports are expected to stop, which should please pundits who are always bewailing Australia's reliance on income from the Chinese supply lines. Now there'll be no supply lines and no income. Another policy that curtails China's investment in high-tech industries such as advanced semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, microelectronics, critical minerals, etc. Australia should vigorously oppose these bans as harmful to the global economy. It initially seemed that China had been had been successful in cutting off, initially it seemed that China had been successfully cut off from access to highly advanced chips. Recently, however, the Chinese company, which also employs over 100,000 scientists and engineers, announced that it had made a big breakthrough in producing highly advanced microchips. Some are in its new Prophone, I should say. This belief that Huawei couldn't have worked out by itself how to manufacture much better chips reminds me of the false assumption in the US that the Soviet Union could not have got its hands on nuclear bombs other than by spying. Instead, the Soviets had high quality scientists and engineers who could work it out from first principles. In June this year, the Treasurer Jim Chalmers fell into step with harmful US policies by ordering 5 Chinese companies to divest their stakes in an Australian rare earth company. Chalmers' explanation was that it was not in the national interest. He didn't bother to get around to telling us how it wasn't in our national interest. There was a time when overseas investment in Australia was welcome for providing extra capital and know-how. Following the best international practice, Huawei earlier bought components for its phones in other countries such as Germany and the US. In 2019, Huawei's phones were on track to become the biggest sellers in the world. Then the then President Donald Trump banned Google from exporting its operating system and apps such as Maps to China. Google lost over $11 billion a year as a result of that attempt to hurt China. Before that, Huawei's rapidly growing sales of telecommunications infrastructure equipment based on its price and the incorporation of new technology such as 5G made it the biggest telecommunications company of its type in the world. It also delivered faster Wi-Fi. This changed after it was banned in the US and Australia following claims it could be used to intercept messages. That can happen with any sort of communications equipment like this. Encrypting the messages, however, would make this irrelevant. So there was no problem for anything that was regarded as important, or companies can do that, or secret for national security or whatever. But the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard, who has never seen an American policy she didn't want to straightaway back, in 2012, didn't understand when she put out a statement stating that Huawei was a threat to Australia's top secret communication system. It couldn't be. That system relied on its own cables that could not be accessed from any other network. Security was further guaranteed by ensuring all messages sent over this system were encrypted to a very high degree. The US National Security Agency has over 30 countries, has a network, I should say, of over 30 countries, which help it intercept communication systems and enabling commercial and other espionage on a scale that China simply cannot match. The Australian Signals Directorate as part of this effort. The Howard government made much play of how it negotiated a free trade agreement with the United States. To its credit, Australia resisted relentless US pressure to abolish our pharmaceutical benefits scheme, so Big Pharma from America could have a go. The US refused to let any sugar in from Australia. This is supposed to be a free trade agreement, but then turned around and let some in from South America for political reasons. Similar problems or worse problems arrived with copyright and patent levels. Australia already had good copyright and patent levels that were to the extent needed to entice inventors, investors, artists to produce new works. But this was not enough to meet the American stranglehold. Australia foolishly agreed to increase copyright on entertainment, software, and similar industries to 70 years after the death of the creator. The existing creators didn't need anything more. For example, Lennon and McCarthy didn't need any more incentive to write songs. The US says it obeys the global rules, but these are not the global rules set out by the United Nations at the end of World War II. They were rules to keep the peace. The rules the US are talking about are those it has made and incorporated in AUKUS. It has not obeyed UN rules and about forbidding the use of force in international relations. But what, sorry, I hit the wrong little button here. It's, for example, just in terms of sort of an economic issue here, when the World Trade Organization makes a ruling that the US doesn't like, it simply ignores it. As others have pointed out before me, the Bretton Woods monetary system established after World War II made the US the world's banker. And in return, it was supposed to act as a neutral party when others put money into the dollar. The US has increasingly violated that commitment. As Eugene Doyle pointed out in a Pearls and Irritations article in June 29 this year, the US, at no cost to itself, has printed or digitally created trillions of dollars and purchased the world's products and services in return. That's a privilege that comes with owning the world's reserve currency. Having been paid in US dollars, these same trading partners often invest many of those dollars back into the US, particularly US treasuries and other things like that. But America is now misusing its power as the owner of the reserve currency. Maynard Keynes, a wonderful columnist who many more should have listened to, argued at Bretton Woods for having a separate international currency that was neutral. The US Treasury refused to do this and won out. Today, a majority of the world economy lives under US sanctions or other coercive measures. Doyle says these measures include embargoes, threats to kick people out of companies or countries out of the international SWIFT payment system. That's the primary mechanism for settling international trade payments. Threats to force major internet providers and other companies to hand over commercial information to US officials. It takes control of choke points in the global internet and finance systems to spy, bully, and use intellectual property to, in effect, conduct piracy. The G7 recently announced that bondholders for its $50 million loan to Ukraine would be paid with interest from Russian funds stolen from Western countries. Not all countries think this is clever, so Australia should speak out against it as a form of theft when decoupling from the US is gathering speed. The figures show that only 50% of global reserves are held by central banks are held in the US dollar, and that's trending down. In August 2022, President Biden seized $7 billion of the Afghan central bank's reserves, which were in America. He announced he would give $3.5 billion to help the victims of September 11, 2001, those terrorist acts in which Pakistanis took no part. He might have given a bit more thought to the people in Afghanistan who have been killed by the American intervention there. Biden is a bad president. In particular, he has not stopped the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians despite having the power to do so. Instead, he sent Israel more bombs to kill more children. I'll just roll on a bit. Australia was also frozen. This was when the coalition was in and thought it was a great idea to mimic what America was doing. They froze the financial assets of some Russian businessmen without any proof of what they had done wrong. We should unfreeze those assets. Now, much earlier, the Whitlam government unwittingly sparked the US's enmity when it tried to raise a loan in Saudi Arabia and send the proceeds back directly to Australia rather than via Wall Street. Kissinger was acutely aware that if other countries followed suit, the US could lose its great advantage of having petrodollars recycled through Wall Street. Now, to end, escaping the US economic stranglehold is possible. The US does not have anything like as much economic power over Australia as it does military power. Moving to an independent security policy is essential. Joining the switch, and we should join the switch out of the US dollar, and that might even help grease the process of loosening the stranglehold the Americans have militarily on this country. That's it, thanks. That's the end, sorry.